Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's look at the topics we are going to discuss today as part of the Hindu newspaper analysis. I have chosen 11 important articles from the Delhi edition. We have 5 articles for a detailed analysis which is more relevant for the mains exam. We are going to cover a number of important editorials and columns. And after this, we have 6 articles that are more important for the prelims exam. So let's cover all these articles in detail. We'll have a comprehensive discussion on all the articles so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. I hope the initiative is helping in your UPSC preparation. So if it is of help, do let us know by pressing the like button. Share these videos with other aspirants and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And also head to our Telegram channel because after the session ends, we have a quiz on these topics. The link for the Telegram channel can be found in the description box below. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at this editorial on page number 6. This article is very important for geography and also for environment and ecology and disaster management. This article deals with the land subsidence that we noticed recently at Joshimath, and it's related to some of the developments concerned with the Joshimath land subsidence incident. The article is mainly focused on how the sharing of information regarding disasters and environmental hazards with the public can actually help the public in preparing for these hazardous events. Because the government has been very hesitant to share the information regarding the land subsidence at Joshimath. In fact, the state government of Uttarakhand, which had commissioned a number of studies to understand why the land subsided, it had put a ban on sharing this information, the research information, with the public. Eventually, it was the High Court of Uttarakhand which intervened and ordered the government to release this information in the public domain so that people have greater awareness which could help in disaster planning and in preparing for such environmental hazards. So let's examine this topic in slight detail. Let's understand what was the land subsidence at Joshimath, what factors caused this particular hazard. Let's understand the risk and let's talk about the importance of information sharing when it comes to dealing with such hazards and disasters. Joshimath, I hope you know, is a very popular pilgrimage town. It's present or located in the Chamoli district of Uttarakhand. It's very close to important pilgrimage sites like Kedarnath, Badrinath, etc. Roughly, this is where Joshimath is located in the state of Uttarakhand. So earlier this year, just a few months ago, at Joshimath, which is a hilly area, there was a land subsidence which was detected. In fact, this was in the making for many years, where several buildings were reporting cracks in their structure. So the subsidence of the land, which is essentially the sinking of the land, caused the destabilization of the temple town. Thousands of houses, residential, commercial buildings were under threat, and as a result, people panicked. A disaster was looming, and as people panicked, they fled the town, they abandoned their homes, and we saw the emergence of a humanitarian crisis as people left Joshimath and took refuge in tents and open spaces down below the valley. So this brings to our attention issues like land subsidence and other hazards present in hilly areas, particularly in the Himalayan belt. I hope you know that the entire Himalayan belt is highly prone to hazards and disasters. Hazard is essentially a potential state or event which has the ability to cause a disaster in the future. So across the Himalayan belt, there are multiple hazards that are present which can turn into deadly disasters. I am sure you know that the Himalayan belt frequently witnesses earthquakes, landslides, and as well as floods. One reason why the Himalayas is so prone is because of the complex geology of the region. The Indian plate, the Indian tectonic plate, as it constantly dives under the Eurasian plate, forming a active subduction zone. So the Himalayan ranges that is present right above the subduction zone becomes a very active seismic zone. In fact, the very formation and rise of Himalayas is a direct result of this tectonic activity which is taking place at the subduction zone of Indian plate and the Eurasian plate. Right? As the Indian plate dives under the Eurasian plate, it is pushing the mass up, leading to the formation of the Himalayas. And as you know, the Himalayas continue to grow even as we speak. So this makes the Himalayan ranges very unstable. Structurally, the whole mountain range is very unstable. And because of the heightened seismic activity, it is very prone to high intensity earthquakes, landslides, and the entire ecology is very delicate and sensitive. Given the nature of the geography and the terrain here, and also the melting of glaciers accompanied with heavy rains and cloud bursts, you also witness massive flooding, including flash floods in the Himalayan belt. So Uttarakhand is at the receiving end of all these disasters. Uttarakhand is one of the most vulnerable states in India, which is affected by earthquakes, landslides, cloud bursts and floods. So given this sensitive ecology of Uttarakhand, it's very important to look at this particular incident at Joshimath in this context. The land subsidence, which started at Joshimath, is a result of few natural and man-made factors. In fact, today, in case of many disasters, there will always be an anthropogenic factor involved, which is increasing the risk factor. Rampant construction, unplanned urbanization, destruction of forest cover, destabilization of the slope, right? These are anthropogenic contributions which has weakened the structure of slopes in the Himalayas. So they are in a way directly responsible, along with the natural terrain and the geology, to give rise to these hazards. If you look at the land subsidence in Joshimath, the proximate reason, the immediate trigger was identified as the tunneling activity which has been taken up near the Joshimath slope as part of the Tapovan Vishnugad hydro power project, which is being executed by the National Thermal Power Corporation. As part of this power project, tunneling activity had been taken up, and this tunneling activity, which is a subterranean construction activity, which involves explosion, removal of earth material, caused the destabilization of the slope, causing the whole slopey area to subside and slip and start sinking, which in turn affected the integrity of the town itself. So no wonder all the buildings, the houses, they reported cracks, and this was identified as the immediate trigger. But apart from this, there are other causes as well. There have been other long-term causes. In Joshimath, which is a popular pilgrimage town, where thousands of pilgrims come every year, there has been exploitative tourism. Exploitative tourism and the increase in population has been held as a direct reason which is responsible for land subsidence, because this has led to rampant construction. The zoning standards, building codes have been violated. These basic regulatory norms which should have been enforced and followed at the ground level, they have been breached, and even the local authorities, the state government, take the blame for not enforcing them adequately. So due to the failure of the basic regulatory standards with regard to zoning and building codes, the construction activity here has been largely unregulated. Joshimath has seen large-scale unplanned urbanization and rapid exploitation of the groundwater table as well. The depletion of the groundwater also has caused destabilization of the subterranean structures. And there have been few underground aquifers which have been detected, few underground springs and streams, which also cause the weakening of the slope material. As there is a constant supply of water in the subterranean region, right? It has led to saturation of water levels, which has weakened the slope, and the broader overexploitation of the groundwater table accompanied with large-scale unplanned urbanization, accompanied with deforestation, has weakened the slope, causing the sinking or the subsidence of the slopey area at Joshimath. So this was the incident that triggered alarm amongst the residents of Joshimath, and it triggered a humanitarian crisis. So as the crisis developed, the government of Uttarakhand had ordered a scientific study to understand the underlying causes and to understand what factors contributed to the crisis. The Uttarakhand government, through the State Disaster Management Authority, under its powers given under the Disaster Management Act of 2005, commissioned a scientific study to understand the hazard. This is part of pre-disaster planning. It's a part of pre-disaster preparedness. So as part of these planning and preparedness measures to prevent a bigger tragedy from happening, a scientific study was commissioned by the State Disaster Management Authority, and multiple scientific institutions were brought on board to conduct this study. These scientific institutions, they have used satellite imagery, they have used geophysical data and geological data to understand the various factors which might have contributed to land subsidence. Over the last few months, these studies have progressed and several scientific reports have been brought out by these institutions. But the concerning development was that the state government prohibited these institutions from sharing that information with the public. It directed these institutions to not share any information with the public without the approval of the central government. The logic, the reasoning given by the state government was, if this information is released in the public domain, it is going to cause unnecessary panic. It is going to create more problems, as it would induce panic amongst the public, and it made it mandatory to get the clearance from the central government before releasing this scientific information into the public domain. In fact, these reports have been available since few weeks, but because of the ban imposed by the government, these institutions did not release those reports. Finally, it took the intervention of the High Court of Uttarakhand. It's the High Court of Uttarakhand which stepped in. It lambasted the authorities for withholding information which is of public importance. Because when planning for any disaster, when preparing for any disaster, public awareness is extremely critical, right? And without the required scientific information and without sharing this information with the public, you can't expect the public to be aware of the hazard, to be aware of the risk and vulnerability. So this is actually an integral part of disaster management. One of the key steps in disaster management is to study the hazard and to share that information with the public to spread awareness so that we can enforce the regulatory standards. We can strictly enforce building codes and zoning standards, and people will be more willing to follow them when they understand the risk. They will understand the risk only when the adequate information has been shared with them. But this crucial information was being withheld by the government, and this was largely on political grounds. Keeping electoral interests in mind, the ruling party at the state and center were trying to withhold this information from the public. So that is what pushed the High Court to intervene, and it ordered the governments to release this information. And now that the scientific assessment reports are available publicly, we can understand what exactly is the risk profile of Joshimath. Let me just take you through this. It will help you understand how you can become more efficient in disaster planning and how we can focus on certain measures through which we can limit the damage during a disaster. See, even though these reports are highly technical, right? It's been brought out by some of the leading scientific institutions of India by using satellite data and geological data. Obviously, a common man cannot understand all the details, but still, we can draw some important conclusions. Experts can simplify the findings of the report and convey the key message to the public so that it generates awareness instead of panic. As the government has said, these reports will not trigger panic if it is communicated in the right way. It's about how the government communicates the information, right? The reports have to be broken down and communicated in a simple manner so that people are aware of the risk. Now, for example, the Central Building Research Institute of Roorkee, which was involved in the study, has found out that 99% of construction in Joshimath did not follow the mandatory building codes and standards. So no wonder the buildings are more vulnerable to even a small amount of subsidence or even to landslides and earthquakes in the region. The building codes which are already available under building bylaws of local authorities have not been implemented. This is a challenge across the country. Even though the building bylaws and building standards are brought out, there is a problem in enforcement. There is a major gap in enforcement. This is due to a nexus between local authorities, politicians, and the real estate mafia. They bypass these regulations, they allow illegal structures to come up, and they don't follow the basic building safety and standard codes that are provided by the government. So this is valuable evidence to show where the problem exists. Now at least we can take measures to correct the course, to change the course of development at places like Joshimath. The National Institute of Hydrology, also from Roorkee, has brought out important findings about the underground aquifers. Regarding the subterranean aquifers, the presence of underground springs and drainage system, right, which has contributed to the weakening of the slope. Right, this data is again very crucial to understand land subsidence. One reason that experts have pointed out is that the drainage system at Joshimath has never been well developed. The town has expanded rapidly with very poor drainage system. Groundwater has been overexploited and several subterranean aquifers have been breached, which has caused the spill out of water into the soil structure, which has weakened the slope itself. So these findings will help improve the understanding amongst the public, right? It will also push the local authorities to be proactive in enforcing the building codes and the zoning standards. That is why this information should not be withheld. This information actually aids public safety. If the public are aware, right, and if the message is communicated appropriately, it will not trigger panic. Rather, it will create awareness. It will make the people and the local authorities more willing to enforce the codes and implement the standards which are mandatory under existing laws. Is that clear? That is the important conclusion you draw from this editorial. See, at Joshimath, for example, the geology definitely is complicated here. But with the right measures in town planning and by restricting construction activity and by providing for planned urbanized development, we can minimize the risk. We can mitigate the risk factor. This is what you do in disaster management. You study the risk, right? You communicate the information and you take appropriate measures in your planning and preparedness and ensure that the buildings which come up here, the settlements, the urban settlements which come up here, they are made disaster resilient and disaster proof. So sharing of this information is vital as it helps in improving public safety. As the government has said, it will not create panic. It will actually help improve public safety, but it depends on how the government communicates this information. It's very important to provide for basic facilities in any urban town. No doubt the government will be concerned about urban development, the welfare of the people, right? But that being said, the government should also be concerned about the impact of these disasters which might occur. If the hazard turns into a disaster, the government should be mindful of the kind of damage that's going to be witnessed in the region. Governments should not just be guided by electoral politics. They need to keep away their electoral calculations on certain key issues, right? They can't block out such information just because it does not suit the narrative of the ruling party. So this is a criticism which has come up against the state government of Uttarakhand, which tried to withhold this information. Communicating this information, bringing it out into public life will actually help in policy making. Now the central government, the state governments, the local authorities, the municipal bodies, they can be more aware. They can make appropriate policies based on scientific evidence which has been brought out through these studies. They can further strengthen the regulatory norms, provide for stronger safety measures, enforce standards regarding urban development, building codes, and even prevent deforestation, right? All these standards can be strictly enforced only when the authorities and the people are aware of the risk. So it's very, very essential to share such important information. It's an integral part of disaster management and planning. Is that clear? That is the core argument of the editorial. Now let's move on to the next article. We have a column on page number 6 that deals with the rights of workers. The topic is related to labor rights, essentially, which is a very important topic under economy. And the writer is saying that at the recently concluded G20 summit, India and the other countries, they missed an opportunity to focus on labor rights. That is the focus of the argument of the writer. As you know, India recently hosted the G20 summit, right? India held the G20 presidency, and overall the summit was a big success. It was definitely a diplomatic victory for India because we managed to achieve consensus amongst conflicting parties and rival countries, right? Despite the challenges created by the Russia-Ukraine war and the current divisions between Western countries and Russia and China, India managed to bring all of them together to work out a consensus and we even brought out the New Delhi Declaration. At the start of the summit, many experts believed it was impossible to achieve consensus and bring out a joint statement. But India managed to achieve the impossible, and that itself was a big diplomatic victory for India. It showed how India can play the role of a mediator, how it can balance conflicting powers and bring about consensus on key global issues. This role of India was firmly established with the publishing of the New Delhi Declaration. Along with that, there were many big achievements. For example, we pushed the membership of African Union to increase representation for Global South. India brought up many issues that affect the Global South. The developing, underdeveloped countries brought up their concerns at the G20. Many big initiatives were launched on the sidelines of G20, like the IMEC corridor, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, and the Global Biofuels Alliance. But apart from all these successful initiatives, there was one drawback according to the writer. The writer says that India missed an opportunity. India and the G20 countries, they missed a golden opportunity to focus on the rights of workers and welfare of workers. There was no adequate discussion on the issue and nothing concrete was provided to provide for labor welfare. So this is the focus of the article. Because see, under the G20 presidency, India had organized several meetings throughout the year on various key issues and domains, right? Around 200 plus meetings were organized by India throughout the year. One of the most important dialogues that were held as part of India's G20 presidency was with regard to labor welfare and labor rights. Under G20, there is a platform called Labor 20, the L20, which brings together the labor ministers of G20 countries to focus on labor rights. So as part of the G20 presidency, 2 meetings of L20 was held in India. A lot of key issues have been discussed, but unfortunately, it failed to make it to the final summit. In the final G20 summit, there was no attention paid to the rights of workers and labor welfare. So that is the criticism of the writer. Despite the achievements under G20 summit, the one big failure was the opportunity was not used by India and other countries to discuss labor issues, especially forced labor, modern day slavery, right? The abuse of workers. These key issues were not discussed and no solutions have been provided, even though the L20 platform tried to bring up some of the issues. Under L20 meetings, right, there was a lot of focus given to labor issues and rights of workers, but unfortunately didn't make it to the final summit. The writer feels that one reason why the labor issues were neglected at the final summit was because India allegedly had politicized the L20 meetings. The writer criticizes the government for nominating the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh as the head of L20. The L20 group was presided by the BMS, which is a right-wing trade union from India, aligned with the ruling party. Usually, L20 is presided by the ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation, which is a global organization that brings global trade unions together. All right. So when L20 meetings take place, there is no political angle attached to it because the meetings are presided by ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation. So all labor unions are brought together to discuss labor issues and the rights and welfare of workers. But since India neglected ITUC and made BMS, the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, which has political affiliations with the ruling BJP, right? This organization was made as the head of L20 meetings. This resulted in the boycott of these meetings by ITUC. ITUC did not participate in the discussions and consultations. Many key issues were discussed at these meetings, but it did not have enough global support because several countries and trade unions boycotted the meetings as India tried to politicize the labor issues. The involvement of a political organization, the involvement of a trade union with political links, right, became the flashpoint, and as a result, nothing concrete could be achieved. Even though there were some discussions on portable social security schemes, especially insurance, pension, etc., which is crucial for the welfare of laborers. There was some discussion on addressing skill gaps, issues facing platform and gig workers. These key issues were discussed, but nothing concrete was achieved at the L20 meetings because of the politicization. All right. Now, the writer further explores what kind of issues affect our laborers and workers, especially Indian workers. He says that in today's labor market in India and around the world, in almost all the G20 countries, there is an exploitative labor system. There is a practice of forced labor. There is a practice of modern day slavery. Even though slavery is abolished, there are new forms of modern day slavery which is being witnessed in the industry, right? So, rights of workers is compromised in several areas. Workers face many issues regarding their safety and well-being, and unfortunately governments aren't paying enough attention, right? That is what the writer is pointing out. He says that if you look at the kafala system, which is very prevalent in West Asia, in the Arab Gulf countries, it's a very brutal exploitative system that affects the workers in all West Asian countries. And this actually affects India because India has a very big diaspora community across West Asian countries. We have close to 9 million Indian workers who are working in the West Asian countries where kafala system is implemented. Kafala system is a labor system. It's a very controversial system because under the kafala system, the migrant workers who come from other countries, right, who are working in West Asian countries, they are tied to their employer. Their employment status, their well-being is directly tied to the employer. Basically, employer has given a lot of control over the migrant workers. This leads to the abuse and exploitation of migrant workers in West Asian countries. I hope you know that most of the workers who go from India to West Asia, they are blue-collared workers. Meaning they don't have very high education or skills. They would be semi-literate or sometimes illiterate as well with semi-skills, right? And they usually take up manual labor, manual work, right? They're not like white-collar professionals, like software engineers, lawyers, doctors. Unlike that, blue-collared workers are semi-skilled, semi-literate, and they usually get employment as manual laborers, right? They get involved in construction industry, in the oil industry, hospitality, and various other key sectors in West Asian countries. So from Saudi Arabia to UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, across these Gulf countries, there are millions of Indians residing and working here, almost 9 to 10 million Indians. But in these countries where kafala system is implemented, it's an exploitative labor system because employers are given direct control over the welfare of workers. There are many instances where blue-collared workers from India have been abused and exploited by their employers in the West Asia region. Let me give you some illustration. Let me give you some examples. There have been many examples, many incidents where the employers in West Asia, they snatch the passports of Indian workers. They withhold the passport, they don't give it back to them. Which means the migrant workers can't come back to India. Right? They are at the mercy of the employers to get the passport back. They don't pay them salaries on time. They pay them very minimal wages. Right? Initially their wages would be something else which was promised. But finally they don't pay the promised amount and pay very minimal wages. They don't take care of their living conditions. They're forced to live in very harsh conditions, right? Where workers are cramped into one single room. They're not given basic facilities. They're not even given social security, like basic insurance, pension, etc. Right? This leads to the abuse and exploitation of Indian workers in West Asia. There are instances where even sexual abuse, molestation, and physical abuse against Indian workers has been reported. Especially women, children, right? In the name of employment, they are pushed into trafficking and prostitution as well in the West Asian labor market. So given all these concerns for Indian workers, it was all the more important for India to push these concerns. Because at G20, even West Asian countries were present. Saudi Arabia is a G20 member. India had invited UAE and even Oman as guest countries. UAE and Oman were present. These three countries alone account for almost 7 million Indian workers in West Asia. So India actually had a strong motivation to use the platform to protect labor rights, to bring out a framework through G20 that could be implemented in all the G20 countries. Right? To tackle such exploitative systems which are actually promoting modern day slavery and forced labor. This is what the writer is pointing out. One big challenge that workers face today, not just in India but around the world, is that insurance schemes are not portable. Social security schemes that provide pension, gratuity, etc., they are not very flexible. So this limits the options for workers. They can't change their employment, they can't move from country to country. It restricts them to few employers and few countries, which makes them more vulnerable for exploitation. This is one key issue, the portability of social security schemes. The wider coverage of social security schemes has been a big issue. Other than that, issues such as decent working conditions, providing a safe environment for work, providing all the amenities, facilities for workers, ensuring equal pay, ensuring there is no discrimination between foreign migrant workers and domestic workers, ensuring gender parity, ensuring there are enough jobs in the market, eliminating child labor, modern day slavery and forced labor, and protecting the welfare and rights of not just the workers but their families as well. These are some major issues which should have been discussed, and the G20 was a golden opportunity to bring up these issues. Please understand that India is the world's largest contributor to the migrant workforce. Almost 13 million Indian workers are settled abroad working in foreign countries. Out of that, 9 million are present in West Asia alone. So India had all the more reason to push these issues and bring out a framework through G20. Because see, the International Labour Organization, the ILO, which is a global organization dealing with labor rights, defines forced labor as all work or service which is exacted from any person under threat of a penalty or for which the person has not offered himself or herself voluntarily. That is, if an employer is forcing you to do some work against your will, if they are using threats, intimidation, let's say they're confiscating your passport, not paying you salaries, subjecting you to physical sexual abuse, using those threats and intimidation as a leverage, and then forcing you to do work against your will, that amounts to forced labor. This is prohibited under the Forced Labor Convention of ILO, which is known as the C29. Please remember this. It's a very, very important point for your prelims. India has signed and ratified the C29. We are a signatory to the Forced Labor Convention of the ILO called C29, which has prohibited forced labor, right? So given that all the G20 countries face the same risk, especially India is at the biggest risk, we should have used the G20 platform for a debate, for a discussion on all these issues affecting labor rights. According to a non-government foundation, there are 27 million people who are still pushed into modern day slavery in G20 economies. And out of them, 11 million workers are from India, which means India is sharing the biggest burden. Even within our own country, forget migrant workers of India. If you look at the domestic industries as well, within India, there are instances of child labor, forced labor, and modern day slavery. If you look at industries like firecracker industry, the Sivkasi firecracker industry, textiles, bricklins, stone cutting, plantations, and metallurgical industries, even mining industry, there is a lot of exploitation of our workers which is compromising their safety and well-being. So it was essential to bring up these issues and discuss them to find solutions to tackle the restrictions on right to movement, confiscation of documents, and even the possibility of physical sexual abuse that workers are subjected to by their employers. Right? Otherwise, there won't be social justice, not just in India, but in the labor markets, in societies around the world, in G20 economies. It will actually undermine democracy, it will threaten democracy, which is a core fundamental value that is upheld by the G20 countries. Right? Because this is a form of injustice. It increases the social divisions, breeds inequality, and threatens the very foundation of democracy. So G20 actually had a strong basis to discuss these issues. It wasn't just an Indian problem, it's a problem affecting all the G20 economies and many other economies as well. So ideally, the platform should have been used to focus on laborers, particularly from the informal sector, and create a global framework through G20 in order to protect their rights and ensure their welfare. Now, without this, even our progress towards sustainable development goals could get affected. Because one of the sustainable development goal is to eradicate poverty, to reduce inequalities in the society, right? To look after welfare of the workers. These targets of sustainable development goals will never be achieved without addressing these key issues affecting laborers and workers, right? That is why the writer says it's a missed opportunity at the G20. India, which actually suffers because of these labor issues, should have championed the cause. Right now, see, we have many labor codes in India. There are multiple labor laws. We are trying to streamline that into 4 labor codes. The Modi government is pushing 4 new labor codes that will subsume all the old, outdated labor laws in the country. Regarding the new labor codes which are coming into force, there is some opposition, there is some criticism from the industry, from the workers. So this was also an opportunity for India to fine-tune the legal system within the country and provide leadership at the global level to create a framework to protect the rights of workers and laborers. All right? So it's a very important article according to me. This could potentially be an essay topic as well, right? So with this, let's move on to the next topic. We have a column from page number 7 that examines the topic of women's reservation. The article is very, very important for social issues and social justice. As you all know, the Women's Reservation Bill has been passed by the Parliament. This historic piece of legislation, right, the 128th Constitutional Amendment Bill, has been passed by both the houses, by both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and there has been near unanimous support from all the parties. Because providing reservation to women in the Parliament, that is in the Lok Sabha, and also in state assemblies, in state legislatures, this is a issue which is beyond debate. Like, no person in their sane mind would argue against the provision. That's why you see that most of the parties, even opposition parties, came together to support the bill. Except for few members here and there, the Women's Reservation Bill has got almost unanimous support in the Parliament. That shows that political parties have gone beyond their politics. They have closed their ranks to come together to support this important legislation, as it marks a paradigm shift in promoting gender equality. Right? Because this is about representation of women in our administration, in our governance. As of now, India is way behind many countries as far as representation of women in public life is concerned. According to data, out of all the elected representatives, hardly 15% of them are women. If you look at MPs and MLAs in the country, right, out of them, only 15% of them are women in the country. This places India even behind other countries like Kenya and Pakistan, right? It shows that there is a lack of participation of women in politics, in elections, in administration and in governance. This reflects in the labor force as well. Labor force participation rates amongst women is very low in India compared to the participation of men in the labor force. Is that clear? Now see, India has already introduced reservation in local bodies through the landmark 73rd, 74th constitutional amendment that introduced Panchayati Raj system and local urban governance bodies. Reservation was provided for at the local level, at the grassroots institutions. And studies have shown that this reservation, which varies from 33% to 50% from one state to another, it has played a big transformative role in increasing women's participation in rural and urban governance. It has truly decentralized democracy and encouraged greater women's participation in politics. But however, there is a drawback, there is a downside to this. The drawback is that if you look at women's reservation given in panchayats and in municipal bodies, usually the men, they use women of their family as proxies. In a patriarchal orthodox society like India, where there is male domination, right? The reservation policy has been derailed and misused because the politicians who are usually men, they field women candidates for the reserved seats, and in their name, they exercise the true power. We have seen this in our personal experience. If you have been to any Zilla Panchayat or Taluk or Gram Panchayat, if you have been to a ward office, right, or your local city corporation, you will see that there are women candidates who have won the election. There will be a women councillor, a women panchayat official who has been elected. But instead of the women, it's the husband who will be sitting in office, taking the decisions on behalf of his wife. So this is a blatant misuse of the provision, right? This could happen in the case of the parliament and the assemblies as well. But that said, the provision of reservation for women in elections has shown results on the ground. Despite the possibility of the provision being misused, right? There has been a lot of progress because there is greater women participation at the ground level, and this is proven with data. There is more proactive involvement of women leaders at the grassroots, at panchayats and municipal bodies, and this has transformed governance, grassroots governance in the country. The same could happen with parliament and state legislatures as well. But however, this alone is not enough according to the writer. The writer says, just providing reservation is not enough as far as elections are concerned. That alone will not bring gender equality. You need to tackle the patriarchy in our society and in our families, in our homes. I'm sure most of you will agree that there is a greater burden on women when it comes to doing all the household chores. Right? When it comes to cleaning, cooking, etc., washing clothes, the basic household chores in a household, in a regular Indian family, the entire burden is placed on the women of the family, whereas men are completely free from this burden. This is a direct result of the orthodoxy and the patriarchy in the Indian society that has led to male domination. Now, how is this concerned with women reservation and gender equality? It has a big role to play because if women are preoccupied with maintaining the house, they're not even being recognized for it. They're not even being paid for it. This is unpaid work that women are doing, right? There is no recognition, there is no gratefulness towards the unpaid work, and they're not even being compensated for it. This limits women to the household. It doesn't give them enough time, energy to step out of the house and participate in the labor market, to participate in elections, in administration and governance. Men have the luxury to take up employment, to contest elections, to participate in governance and administration, because there is no burden on them to do the household chores. This is a direct result of gender inequality in the society, right? So that is why the writer is saying that unpaid work has to be recognized. Please note the writer is the spokesperson of DMK. That is something you should know before we look at the next point, right? He's a lawyer and also the spokesperson of the ruling party in Tamil Nadu. He mentions a very important scheme launched by the Tamil Nadu government called Magalir Urumai Togai scheme, under which the Tamil Nadu government has provided direct cash transfer for women who perform household chores. Essentially, housewives, right, who are carrying out the unpaid household work, they are getting a monthly cash payment through the government. This is basically a recognition of the household work. It's a incentive to tackle patriarchy and try to push the burden of household chores on men as well, right? And it essentially provides for paid household work that empowers women and reduces gender inequality. He says that such schemes are essential along with women's reservation. Along with providing reservation in the parliament and legislatures, unpaid household work has to be recognized. Cash payments have to be provided to women performing the household work. And proactive steps have to be taken at a societal level to challenge the patriarchy and ensure that men of the household also take up household chores. Cleaning, washing, cooking should not be limited to just women, right? We see this in most of our families, in our households, in our society. This has to be tackled. This is a social evil which has to be tackled. That is when you will achieve true gender equality, according to the writer. Is that clear? So that is the core argument the writer is making. Next, we have two related articles. There is one article on page number 7 that talks about India-Canada relations, and there's another related article on page number 10. All right, let's examine both these articles, and this will complete our detailed discussion of all the big topics in today's newspaper. Here, I'll not go into all the details because I've already covered this topic just a few days ago. You can go back and watch that Hindu analysis where I've discussed the current disruption in India-Canada relations. But here I'll just focus on how India-Canada relations have been affected, and previously how a reset had been achieved under the then Manmohan Singh government when Canada was headed by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Back in 2010, India-Canada relations were reset by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and then Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper. See, India-Canada relations have been derailed. They have been very badly affected from 1970s and 1980s itself. Because Canadian governments, Canadian political parties and political leaders, they have often been aligned with pro-Khalistan elements in Canada. They have tolerated, in a way, nurtured Khalistan terrorism and extremism, including the organized criminal networks that are involved with them, and they have allowed them to flourish. Right? Canada, as we know, has a very strong Sikh diaspora. Of course, majority of the diaspora have nothing to do with radicalism or extremism. Majority of the diaspora are part of the peaceful community. But some of these radicals who are brainwashed, indoctrinated, right, who have the backing of external actors like Pakistan's ISI, they have been involved in these extremist activities, which is nothing but an act of terrorism against India, right? And Canadian leaders, parties and governments have nurtured it, they have sustained it. In fact, in the 1980s, when Khalistan movement had reared its head, India had given enough warnings, even passed on valuable intelligence, and we requested Canada to act against these terrorists. But Canada turned a blind eye to it. Back then, Mr. Trudeau was the Prime Minister, the father of the current Prime Minister. Justin Trudeau's father, the senior Trudeau, was a Prime Minister back then. So again, his policy was very similar to his son's. He wouldn't pay interest to India's concerns. And eventually, this negligent attitude of Canada led to a major tragedy. In the year 1985, a Air India flight, Air Kanishka, that was headed from Canada to India, was bombed by Khalistan terrorists from Babar Khalsa International. A Khalistani terror group called Babar Khalsa International planted bombs on this Air India aircraft. It crashed in the Atlantic, killing more than 300 people. This was the biggest terror attack of its kind back in 1985. It was the biggest civil aviation tragedy and the biggest terror attack of this kind until the 9/11 attacks. So there was a clear mistake on Canada's part. In a way, it had allowed the attack to happen. It was a clear intelligence failure despite repeated warnings from India. Canada had failed to prevent the attack. So as a result of this disruption, Indian leaders had stopped visiting Canada. The last visit from an Indian Prime Minister was in 1973. After this, no Indian PM visited Canada because of the difficult relations that had developed. Since Canada had nurtured and sheltered Khalistani elements, no Indian Prime Minister paid a visit to Canada. Our ties had been badly compromised. Alright? But Stephen Harper was the first Prime Minister who turned this around. There were three events which contributed to this reset in India-Canada relations in the early 2000s. From 2000 to 2010, there were three major developments that led to transformation of our ties. First was the 9/11 attacks carried out by Al-Qaeda. This led US to declare a global war on terrorism, and all the NATO allies, they joined this global war on terrorism. So Canada was obligated to tackle all forms of terrorism, including Khalistani terrorism. And also please note, Canada had become home to Sri Lankan Tamil militants as well from LTTE. Several LTTE sympathizers who had run away from Sri Lanka also had taken shelter and refuge in Canada. So in a way, Canada was becoming a safe haven for multiple terror and militant outfits like Khalistani outfits and LTTE. So in 2001, Canada was under a lot of pressure to act against all forms of terrorism after the 9/11 attacks. The second factor which led to an improvement in India-Canada relations was the 26/11 Mumbai attacks against India. This major terror attack carried out by Lashkar-e-Toiba, which was state-sponsored by the Pakistani intelligence agency, it led the Manmohan Singh government to launch a diplomatic offensive against Pakistan. Following the Mumbai attacks, India collected evidence to show Pakistani involvement. We directly linked the attacks with Pakistan's ISI, with Pakistani state agencies, and we worked with US and European allies to bring tremendous global pressure on Pakistan. So Canada was forced to cooperate with India because even Canada realized that terror groups like Lashkar and Pakistan-sponsored groups are a mutual threat. Right? Canada realized that such forms of terrorism is a common threat for all the democratic countries. So these two incidents played a big role in resetting the relationship. And the third factor was the role of Stephen Harper, who realized the importance of India-Canada relations. As the Prime Minister in 2010, he issued a public apology. For the first time, a Canadian leader was apologizing for Air Kanishka attack, for the bombing of Air Kanishka, which happened because of a Canadian mistake. It was an intelligence failure on their part that failed to curb Khalistani terrorism in the 80s. So Stephen Harper publicly apologized for this. And this paved the way for Prime Minister Manmohan Singh to visit Canada as part of the G20 summit that was being held in 2010. Even though it was not an individual bilateral visit, it was part of the G20, but still Prime Minister Manmohan Singh chose to visit Canada, becoming the first Prime Minister since 1973 to visit Canada. This marked a turnaround in the relationship. Under Stephen Harper and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, there was a turnaround achieved in the relationship, and both countries, they signed a civil nuclear deal. They immediately signed a civil nuclear cooperation deal that transformed the relationship, and they started focusing on trade relations. Trade and investment doubled between India and Canada, and the relations started thriving. So this is how the reset had been achieved in the last 10 to 15 years. But now, thanks to the politics of Justin Trudeau and his government, everything has been ruined in the India-Canada relationship. This is not my personal opinion. This is the opinion of several former diplomats and top strategic experts of India. For example, former Foreign Secretary Nirupama Rao says that the current baseless claims of Canadian Prime Minister that Indian agents were involved in the killing of a Khalistani terrorist on Canadian soil, It has completely derailed the relationship. This is rock bottom in the India-Canada relations. Without any proper evidence, right? That too with a close friend, with a common like-minded democracy, Canada has raised these unnecessary allegations which could have been tackled otherwise. Because in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, there are other cases, there are other angles involved. Right? There is a possibility of an organized criminal gang executing the Khalistani terrorist without any Indian involvement. So Canada has based its claims on assumptions and invalid evidence, and it has completely destroyed the India-Canada relations right now. This is mainly due to political circumstances. Because Trudeau's government right now, the Liberal Party, is dependent on support from New Democratic Party, which is headed by Jagmeet Singh. And Jagmeet Singh and his party are known to be aligned with Khalistani elements. Khalistani separatists and several organized criminals, right, from Punjab who have fled into Canada, who have taken shelter in Canada. They have support of this party, which is a major constituent of the current Canadian government. Trudeau's government is dependent on support from Jagmeet Singh's party. So this creates a political compulsion to play this line and please the Khalistani sympathizers, and this has destroyed India-Canada relations right now. Now, we have a related article on page number 10. The NIA, the National Investigation Agency, which is the premier counter-terror agency of India, has launched a major raid against multiple organized criminal groups that are linked with Khalistani terror outfits. Following the escalating threat from Khalistan groups and their connections with organized criminal gangs, the NIA has initiated a major crackdown. Because see, there is a symbiotic relationship between terrorism and organized crime. You need to understand this. Organized crime such as drug trafficking and drug smuggling, arms smuggling, extortion, then targeted killings, paid killings like Supari killings, for example. These criminal activities, which are run by organized criminal networks, they share a direct relationship with terror activities as well. Right? Terrorism and organized crime share a direct connect. For example, you can see this in Pakistan as well, in Myanmar as well. Towards Pakistan, you have the Golden Crescent region that covers Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iran, which is a hub of drug smuggling and drug trafficking and arms trafficking. So the prevalence of organized crime in the Afghanistan-Pakistan belt is what directly fuels terrorism. Because terrorists have easy access to drugs, easy access to funds and weapons. And they feed each other, they support each other. Right? Criminals rely on terrorists to destabilize the law and order situation so they can flourish in their activities. Right? Terrorists rely on the criminal gangs for smuggling not just drugs and weapons, but even explosives and to arrange logistical support for terror operations. They rely on money laundering channels. There is a connection with money laundering. There's a direct link with Hawala transactions to carry out illegal financial transactions. Right? So there exists a direct connect between terrorism, organized crime and money laundering. You can see this towards Myanmar as well, towards the Golden Triangle that covers Myanmar, Cambodia and Laos, where many insurgent terror groups are directly connected with organized criminal networks. The same is the case with Khalistani outfits as well. Several criminal gangs in India, based out of Punjab and India, which have connections in Canada and other countries within the diaspora community, they are connected with Khalistani terror outfits. And these elements have external support from Pakistan's ISI. That is why the crackdown initiated by NIA is critical in our fight against terrorism. Cracking down on organized crime, tackling these criminal outfits, and dealing with these extortion rings and gangs, and also dealing with money laundering and Hawala transactions is crucial. It's a crucial part of our fight against terrorism. Is that clear? In fact, the recent killings that you have witnessed, where Canada has blamed India, apparently it might have been carried out by one of the criminal gangs. Right now, within the Khalistani movement, there are few major criminal gangs. One of them is the Lawrence Bishnoi gang. Lawrence Bishnoi is a dreaded gangster, an Indian gangster. He is seen as the mastermind in the murder of Sidhu Moosewala as well, right? The popular Punjabi singer who was assassinated last year. There are direct links between this criminal network and the Khalistani terror groups. He has a wide network in Canada through another gangster called Goldie Brar. Right now, these are prime targets for India. Lawrence Bishnoi has already been arrested. He is in custody. But still, he is wielding influence from jail. By sitting in jail, he is controlling his gang operations in India and around the world. And he has developed hit squads which carry out assassinations and extort money around the world. They threaten businessmen, they threaten celebrities and extract money from them. And they are involved in drug smuggling, and they are also involved in backing Khalistan outfits. The Bishnoi gang has a presence in Australia, in Thailand, and in European countries as well, along with Canada. So right now, these criminals are the target, who are closely linked with Khalistani terrorists. Is that clear? For example, a criminal called Arsh Dala, who is part of another rival gang, the Bambiba gang, headed by Davinder Bambi. This is another deadly gangster outfit operating in India and abroad. And there are several top criminals who are on the hit list of India. Meaning India wants to get them arrested, extradite them back to India. And some of them are already in jail, but still they're operating freely from jail. So right now the focus has shifted to tackle these criminal gangs which are directly linked with Khalistani outfits. So most likely in the recent murders we have seen, right, in this year itself, in the last 1 year, we have seen several killings in the same manner where several Khalistani terrorists have been eliminated. Several criminals have been eliminated in Pakistan, in Canada, and in other countries. So because of this pattern, some are connecting this with India. They're alleging that India's RAW is behind these assassinations. But please understand, India officially at least doesn't have a policy of executing such assassinations on foreign soil. As a matter of policy, as said by Foreign Minister Jaishankar, we don't execute such hits. We don't target people in other countries. We don't have a policy of carrying out targeted assassinations. So there could be a possibility where these criminal gangs which are fighting against each other, they could be involved in eliminating some of these members because of their own rivalry, gang rivalry. There could also be the role of Pakistan's ISI, which is using these criminal gangs to target few Khalistani leaders to bring the blame on India. There could be a Pakistani attempt to derail India-Canada relations by getting Hardeep Singh Nijjar killed through a criminal gang. Right? So this is a very, very important connection that you need to understand. Given the risk right now, you need to pay attention to this topic. Right? There is another group called Sikhs for Justice, which is a terrorist outfit based out of US, headed by Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. He's a designated terrorist under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. He remains free. He's based out of Canada right now, and he is openly leading terror activities against India. So all his properties, his involvement with criminal gangs in India is being right now countered by India. His properties have been confiscated, right? There is a crackdown on all these criminal outfits, the Bishnoi gang, the Bambiba gang. And this is not just a domestic effort. We are trying to make it a global effort to work with other countries and bring down these gangsters and terror elements who are connected with each other. All right? So please understand this connection with organized crime and terrorism. So now coming to the last part of today's discussion, we'll take a quick look at the prelims related articles. On the first page, we have an article related to AFSPA, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Manipur has extended AFSPA for 6 months. See, AFSPA is in operation in Manipur in the entire state except for in the Imphal Valley. Except for 7 districts of the Imphal Valley. Across other parts of Manipur, especially the hilly areas, they're all covered under AFSPA. And just yesterday, even Arunachal Pradesh and Nagaland have extended AFSPA for another 6 months. Now let me give out some important points about AFSPA. It's very relevant for prelims and even for your mains. AFSPA or Armed Forces Special Powers Act is a colonial era law. It was first used in 1942 by the British to target the Quit India movement. Essentially, it gives special powers to police and security forces to deal with any disturbances, to deal with security situations. Post-independence, during the partition, to contain the partition violence, when communal violence had broken out, right, in parts of Punjab and Bengal, where massive communal riots were being reported, AFSPA was again brought into force to tackle the communal violence. But after this, India did not inherit AFSPA. Post-independence, we didn't inherit AFSPA because it has always been a controversial law. It has given tremendous powers to the British police and security forces, and it has been used to target India's freedom movement. So India had kept AFSPA aside until 1958. But as Northeast insurgency broke out in parts of today's Assam, Nagaland, and Manipur, Mizoram, massive insurgency broke out in the 60s and 70s. Naga insurgency started by 1947, right? So to tackle Naga insurgency, AFSPA was brought back and implemented in the Northeast, and gradually it was extended to all the northeastern states as insurgency broke out in other states as well. So from Assam to Meghalaya to Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Mizoram, Manipur, all the northeastern states were covered, even Tripura, under AFSPA. Later in 1983, to tackle the Khalistan movement in Punjab, AFSPA was extended to Punjab as well. Then in 1990, when insurgency terrorism had broken out in Kashmir, even here AFSPA was introduced to give special powers to police and security forces to tackle insurgency and terrorism. Now this law has always been very controversial because it gives tremendous powers to police and security forces. In the name of tackling insurgency and terrorism, it gives the power to open fire. It gives essentially the license to kill. Security forces are given immunity to open fire if necessary and even kill the individual, and they enjoy a degree of legal immunity. Some argue this is necessary. There are supporters of AFSPA who say that our forces who are operating in such difficult conflict zones, who are tackling insurgency and terrorism, which is often sponsored by foreign actors, they need support, they need legal immunity, or else they won't be able to function in such a difficult hostile environment, right? But others say that this license to kill is often misused, and for any investigations to happen, right, regarding these encounters, approvals have to be given by the government itself. Without government approval, there can't be an investigation, a police complaint cannot be filed in such cases where AFSPA is in place. Apart from the power to kill, it also gives the power to search, to destroy property, to arrest, and all of this can be done without a warrant. Without a warrant, security forces can search your property. They can even destroy property if needed for countering terrorism and insurgency. And they can arrest people without a warrant. These are some tremendous powers which are usually not seen in democracies, right? But the government, the armed forces and supporters, they argue that these extraordinary powers are needed given the security situation we are dealing with in our conflict zones. And the precondition to bring AFSPA is that the Disturbed Areas Act has to be invoked by the government. Either the state government or even the center will have the power to declare that an area is disturbed under the Disturbed Areas Act, and in such an area which is declared as disturbed area, then AFSPA can be extended. So either state government can request it or center can go ahead and do it on its own. All right? But under AFSPA, there are allegations of large-scale human rights violations. So Supreme Court and various committees have looked into the issue, and they've all observed that AFSPA indeed has led to a lot of significant human rights abuses. In Punjab, in Kashmir, in Manipur, across the Northeast, a lot of human rights abuses have been reported, from fake killings to rapes, murders have been reported. And as a result, there are various committees which have taken a stand against AFSPA. Now, I want you guys to take up a small exercise. There are two important committees that have dealt with AFSPA. Find out the names of these committees, read their recommendations, and mention the names of these committees in the comments below. Is that clear? There are two very important commissions that have examined AFSPA and its relevance. Alright, so please find out the names of these commissions, go through the recommendations as well, and mention the names in the comments below. In 1998, the Supreme Court, which was also looking into this issue, established a few guidelines to prevent the misuse of AFSPA. And one important guideline was that implementation of AFSPA cannot be infinite. Supreme Court said AFSPA should be implemented only for 6 months. And after 6 months, there should be a review and then a decision should be taken whether it should be extended or not. That is why every 6 months you read in newspapers that AFSPA has been extended for another 6 months. Prior to this Supreme Court ruling, there was no such condition. AFSPA was indefinitely imposed across entire states. But Supreme Court stepped in 1998. It took into account the human rights allegations, the violations that came into picture. And it said implementation cannot be for an infinite period. It can't be indefinite. The Supreme Court said every 6 months you will review the security situation. Only if the situation warrants AFSPA, only then it will be extended by the government. That is why every 6 months there is an extension. All right. All these points I've mentioned can be important for your prelims, very important for your mains as well. Next, on page number 4, there is a mention that Bihar might get its second tiger reserve very soon. As of now, Bihar has only one tiger reserve, which is the Valmiki Tiger Reserve that you can see here in the West Champaran district. In West Champaran, near the Nepal border, right, you have the Valmiki Tiger Reserve, which is the only tiger reserve of Bihar right now. And NTCA, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, which is responsible for running Project Tiger, right? NTCA is the one which approves the establishment of new tiger reserves. It has already given in principle approval for a second tiger reserve in Bihar, which is the Kaimur Wildlife Sanctuary located over here. It borders UP, Madhya Pradesh and Jharkhand. This is where the Kaimur Wildlife Sanctuary is located. It consists of a hilly area and a plain area, and it is blessed with very thick forest cover. The Kaimur Wildlife Sanctuary is bound by two rivers, which is the Manasa and the Durgavati River. The Manasa and Durgavati River, they flow around the wildlife sanctuary. Right now it's a protected area as a wildlife sanctuary. So it could be elevated as a tiger reserve now that NTCA has given in principle approval. So very soon Bihar will get its second tiger reserve, and in this wildlife sanctuary a decent population, a quite healthy population of tigers has been found. Alright, so please make a note of this important point. Next, on page 12, there is a report from the UN Population Fund. The report points out that India's population is going to age in the coming years. That is essentially you and us. People of our age right now who are in our 20s, 30s, of course we will age in the coming years, and by 2050 the country is going to deal with a major population problem. The aged population will increase significantly, touching 20%. And by the end of the century, it is expected to hit almost 40%. Close to 36 to 40% of our population will be old age population. By 2023, right now, that is as of now, the old age population is roughly around 10% in India. Alright, so we have a much younger population today. That's why we enjoy a demographic dividend. But going forward in the next decade, in the next 2-3 decades, you will see a significant rise in the age group of 60 and 80. And you will see that by 2046 and by the middle of the century, we are going to hit 20% old age population. 20% plus would be old age population in the country, 20.8% to be precise, by the middle of the century. This will rise up to 36 to 40% by the end of the century. Alright, and by 2046 itself, our old age population will cross the population of children below 15 years. For the first time, the population of children below 15 years will reduce compared to the population of our old age population. So this means the government has to plan accordingly. The society has to plan accordingly. Because the data is indicating that majority of the old age people will be women. Because women have a higher life expectancy. They will live more number of years than men. Life expectancy of women has increased considerably. Is that clear? And also most of the old age people they will be concentrated in rural areas. This phenomena has to be kept in mind while making policies for our elderly people. There is a feminization and ruralization of older population. This is going to continue. All right. So in the future, we will face a situation similar to China, Japan, and European countries, which are already dealing with the challenges posed by an aging population and a declining young population. These are important findings in the population report that is brought out by the UN Population Fund. It's brought out the India Aging Report, right? It presents the demographics of India regarding the age groups present and how it will progress in the coming years. So this will be a very important document, a very important tool for policymakers to accordingly plan for the welfare of the old age population in the coming decades, right? And also to design economic measures to sustain the economy despite the increasing old age population. That is why the topic is important. Now please read about the UN Population Fund. Another small homework for you. Read about UN Population Fund, identify 3-4 important points about the Population Fund and mention that in the comments. Next, on page 12, there is a mention of Swavlamban 2.0, which is an initiative of the Indian Navy to promote defense indigenization. The Indian Navy, just like the other armed forces, is trying to become Atmanirbhar. It's trying to become self-reliant in defense technologies. So previously it had launched Swavlamban initiative, right, as part of the Amrit Kal celebrations to mark the 75th year of independence. And the Navy had committed to come out with 75 new technologies in the naval domain, which will be developed not just by the public research institutions, but with involvement of private defense companies and startups. The naval research institutions like the Naval Innovation, Indigenization Organization and Technology Development Accreditation Cell and other R&D initiatives like the Sprint initiative of the Navy, along with DRDO and other naval research organizations, they have actively collaborated with private industry and defense startups to promote indigenization of naval defense technology. 75 new technologies have been developed in the last 1.5 years itself. For example, underwater drones, new material for shipbuilding, they've all been brought out by government research institutions, right, associated with the Navy, and they are sharing the technology with private industry and startups to streamline the defense production and to make India self-reliant. So this initiative is being extended under Swavlamban 2.0. This will be the second version of the initiative. The focus will be on bringing these products into the market, ensuring production and setting up the assembly lines and ensuring that we become self-reliant and focus on indigenization of our naval technology. So that is what Swavlamban 2.0 is all about. Next, there's another article in the economy section that mentions G-SECs or government securities or government bonds, also called treasury bonds. Usually government securities, they are issued for a short-term period in India. A G-SEC or a treasury bond or government bonds, they are seen as a very safe investment for the long term because there is no risk of default, because these securities are backed by the government itself. Through these bonds and securities that are issued, governments raise revenue, they raise capital basically, right? In the debt market, they issue the bonds like green bonds, treasury bonds. They're all part of G-SECs or government securities, right? Central government and state government, they have the powers to issue this debt instrument and raise capital from the public, from the debt market. Basically, they're raising a loan, right? In return, they promise an interest rate. At the maturity of the securities and bonds, the government will pay back the money with interest. Since it is backed by the sovereign government, right? It is seen as sovereign debt and the chances of failure is almost zero here, correct? Unless the whole economy collapses, these debt instruments will not fail. It will fetch very stable, good returns for the investors. So this is one way of raising capital from the market, to borrow debt from the market to finance the fiscal deficit. Usually in India, the G-SECs that were issued, they were only for few days and few weeks, right? The whole G-SEC market, the tenure would be like 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. They were all short-term government securities. but for the first time, India is issuing ultra-long government securities. A new bond is being introduced for 50 years and a green bond for 30 years. These are ultra-long government securities. Usually it is seen in developed countries like US, in European markets. Such countries issue such ultra-long government bonds. For the first time, India is issuing these ultra-long government securities. So please be aware of what government securities are, because this is a very important development. Now, coming to the last article for today from Environment and Ecology, there is a mention of a tortoise, the Bolson Tortoise, in the last page, in the second page of the Science and Tech Complementary Edition in the online version of the Hindu. There is a mention of a tortoise, the Bolson Tortoise, which is facing the threat of extinction. You can see the image of the tortoise here, so you can easily recollect, right? You should know the conservation status, the risk it is facing, and what is its distribution, where is it found. These tortoises, they are very unique. They are found only in North America. They're largely endemic to North America, specifically to Mexico. In North Central Mexico is where you find Bolson tortoises, but their numbers have declined drastically. They are on the brink of extinction. So on the IUCN Red List, they are listed as critically endangered. Please remember this point. They are listed as critically endangered. The biggest threat they are facing is the loss of habitat. They're also facing risk from the pet industry, and they're also consumed as food. So they're targeted by hunters and poachers. They are hunted, poached for food. They're seen as a delicacy in Mexico, and they're also exploited in the pet market. They're sold as a pet. And habitat loss in general has threatened the survival of the species. So United States is helping Mexico to conserve this species, which is critically endangered. So that is what you should know about the Bolson tortoise. So this completes my detailed discussion of the Hindu newspaper. Trust me, these 70 to 80 minutes of discussion is totally worth it, because it not only covers all the articles, but we are giving you a lot of analysis along with the background and additional facts. The idea is to ensure you need not rely too much on newspaper. Many students find it difficult to read and understand the Hindu newspaper on their own. So spend these 70-80 minutes with us, right? The time limit doesn't really matter. It's about covering more topics holistically and understanding all the key topics, right? That is what UPSC expects. It requires a conceptual and thorough understanding for both prelims and mains. So I hope you guys are satisfied. Do let me know how the session went, right? If you liked it, do press the like button, share your comments, and do subscribe to the channel, and also take up these questions for your answer writing practice. Post the answers in the answer writing portal. For that, link is there in the description, and also join the Telegram channel because we have a quiz after the session ends. Again, the link is there in your description box. So that is it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.